Hey, this is the Coach Ed Podcast. I am Ed Weathholder. You can track me down at strengthfitnessandspeed.com. Hey, we're here today. I have a special guest, John Blackburn. He's one of our newest coaches here at Strength, Fitness, and Speed. And John has always been a very inquisitive guy, and he's probably asked me more questions over the years than anyone else, and I appreciate every minute of it. So today, John is going to fire away some random questions, so we'll see how this goes. John, how you doing today?
Doing very well. How are you?
Good, really good. What do you got for me today, man?
Sweet. So to start off, I was hoping maybe you could just talk about a little bit of the basics about speed training that we do down here. I know a lot of people, whether they're in like high school or college, kind of have somewhat of an idea on like regular strength training, but I feel like a lot of people don't really know about speed training and what we do down here. So
Cool.
maybe we can start running through that.
Excellent. Hey, we're live today, too. We hear a lot of good work going on in the background. Anyhow, John, when everybody starts out here, they get an assessment when they begin. And we kind of take a look at their running style and things like that. Upper body mechanics, lower body mechanics, limitations at the different joints as far as range of motion goes. And quite honestly, at the root of speed is strength. So it's definitely a necessary requirement. But a lot of times you can look at their mechanics first and see like, hey, their first step is off. They roll from the heel to the ball, their foot on the first step, they pull, they don't push. Things like that are super obvious. So aside from like that importance of mechanics, there's also that underlying power part of it too. So there's sprint specific ways and movement specific ways to develop power. I mean, there's also coordination factors that are involved there, but mostly strength's at the root of speed. And if you can teach kids to harness that with proper mechanics, and also teach them how to develop power through plyometric and strength methods, that's oftentimes a really powerful recipe. One of the problems that goes along with speed training is how do you overload it? And quite honestly, sometimes repetitive drills, they're very hard to overload. Like take a ladder, for instance. It's great for a beginner, develop basic fundamental coordination, but after a while it just becomes a demonstration of speed versus you're no longer improving. It has its place in warm-ups and things like that, but after a while, as you progress, things like that are predictable are quite hard to overload. I mean, speed also has a reactive component, and assuredly if we're stopping and starting and sprinting, changing direction with good mechanics, it becomes much easier to overload it with the randomness of the drill or how heavy the drag is. Obviously you can't have them pulling tractor trailers and expect not to impact mechanics. So although it's fun to really overload your buddy when you're holding on to him during a resisted run, if you resist too much, mechanics change and the enhancement of speed goes down. So that is a very long-winded answer, John, and there's a whole lot to it, but that kind of strikes at the basic root of the problem. You know what? Something else just hit me. We're going to throw in one more thing.
Awesome.
In the world of weight training, there's a complexing that goes on that can lead to enhanced results where you pair a plyo with a resisted movement. That would be like doing a bench with a drop push-up or something like that. Similarly with speed, I've had great results through the years of doing, say for instance, like a round of 5 resisted sprints. You take a pause and you follow that sort of thing up with like a plyo drill, be it like a single leg hop or a depth jump. Those two things tend to feed each other, enhance nervous activity. So that's something else I've always tried to throw in. And then at first it was quite an accident. I just thought, well, this works in the weight training world. How about if we apply this to the speed training world? So that started with us way back in like 99 and 2000. Tested, saw great results with it. So we still use variations of it today.
Awesome. I think that kind of flows into like my next subject. So I know like just in previous conversation you mentioned one of the whole reasons you started this company was because of your passion for training. So where did like the expertise and knowledge of like speed and agility training come from weight training?
Sure. So back when I started this, I had a really sound physiological base. I was involved in medicine for 10 years. And quite honestly, early on, the speed training that we did here, 1999, 2000, it was very it was primitive. but we certainly could get guys and girls faster, straight ahead. They certainly stopped and started, way better. So a lot of it at the time was, very foundational, very rudimentary. And as time progressed, and as we, I don't want to say experimented, but like added in different moves, uh, we would see what the benefit of that was. As well as taking all the latest and the greatest from the university studies and such. But we were able to test so frequently we could tell if something was working or not. So a lot of it was, stuff that we would see, universities and such were doing, but a whole lot of it was just us testing our own data based on different drills we would try first on ourselves, and then we would try to apply them with our athletes to see if that would work. So a lot of this has been learning as we go, for sure, 100%.
Sweet. How do you think, like, in terms of mechanics, upper body and lower body affects speed?
So, I mean, lower body's paramount. I mean, as far as like a top end speed, someone that's in a sport or a track athlete at about that 60 or 70 meter mark, a lot of that has a huge genetic component. That's a very, very much a function of leg power up at that top end. So as far as pure power goes, that's important for top end and the lower body type of thing. Acceleration, also a huge component there. The acceleration part's a lot more trainable than the top end speed. As far as upper body goes, one of my coaches a long time ago did a study, and it was a speed training study, but it involved chin-ups. So we worked on having athletes improve their upper body pulling power. And as fate had it, and studies bear this out, up to 10% of your sprint ability comes from your upper body, arm action, elbow drive. And the kids got, in addition to getting bigger backs and arms, they all got faster in the acceleration phase, which makes a lot of sense. There's a huge amount of upper body involved in the takeoff. So that was kind of interesting to us. We were able to test and figure it out ourselves as well, as based on what we had already learned about it.
That's pretty sweet. Do you think pulling, like a pulling motion, kind of helps with like that elbow drive, especially?
Yeah, definitely. Like a chin-up movement. There's a lot of proponents of doing like carrying dumbbells when you sprint. I just kind of feel like that tinkers with mechanics too much as far as working on purely arm drive. But I love like that movement where the elbow comes down closer to the side. So that would be like
Right.
a chin up, and even a little more specifically like a neutral grip chin up.
Yeah.
Kind of mimics that quite a bit.
Yeah.
Mid ball slams. There's another example of complexing. I love it. You do a neutral grip chin up, and you pair that up with an overhead slam, and those two kind of really feed each other.
Yeah, so back to that one point you just mentioned with running with like dumbbells.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think like really decreasing the load with like maybe like even like a half or 1, maybe 2 pounds like max would have any benefit, or do you think that's still a little bit much?
As far as holding on to the dumbbells? Yeah, so if you didn't tinker with your mechanics too much, there's also like an overspeed part you can do with that where you actually drop the dumbbells, and that's
Right.
been around for like a long time. I think as long as everything stays lighter, it has a big transfer. Like when you get closer and closer to sports specificity and you start tinkering with it with like too much weight,
Right.
your firing pattern is not the same as your sport movement.
Right.
As a matter of fact, you can screw up your sport movement. But I kind of look at that the same way with sprinting. So yeah, it would have to be like really light to answer your question.
Cool. So like next we could talk a little bit about like shin angle and like the angle between your legs and how that affects like your, especially like takeoff speed.
Yeah, I mean that's so important. Like that lets you make the big bold marketing statement that we're going to make you 0.2 or 0.3 of a second faster, because if you see an athlete that has a first step that's too big and their shin angle is neutral and like vertical, they're really losing like a ton of push. And that first step kind of sets up steps 2, 3, 4. And if that angle is certainly not positive enough, they're certainly losing a lot of their initial impulse there when they take off. So that's just huge. And a lot of times, athlete will take that big over dramatic step from a dead stop, and just you see their heel contact rolls to the ball of their foot. It takes like a half a month to get them started. So That's enormous. It's like a simple fix too.
Yeah.
The younger the athlete is, it's simpler. If you have an athlete in that's like 14, 15, 16, it gets a little bit more difficult, but it's definitely manageable for sure.
Yeah, that I actually took this from you with some of the kids I do speed with. Whenever you sit like halfway in a box,
Yeah.
really load up your front leg, and it kind of forces you to that back knee to drive forward and
Yeah.
really focus on that initial first couple steps at least.
For sure. And like you said, John, that's that back foot coming through, or back knee coming through with a nice tight lever.
Yeah.
Your calf's not flopping around back there and just coming through like you'd kick a soccer ball. Not that, but more like an MMA knee coming through is what we
Yeah.
strive for. I love that drill because it certainly gets that back knee punch right where it needs to be.
I think that's awesome too, because back to your point of taking things that are somewhat simple and just overloading and progressing them, I think that's another really good exercise that I try to progress with some of the kids down here as well.
Cool. Yeah, awesome. I'm glad you brought that up about that back knee. The knee punch is so critical. It's almost as critical as like that shin angle when you take off.
Yeah. Something else I think a lot of kids maybe don't necessarily realize, especially like youth athletes and even going into middle school, like false steps with that
Yeah.
lead leg.
I mean, there's some sports that actually teach like a plyo bounce. I'm not a huge fan of it. I just feel like with a more efficient strategy to the target, whether it's a ground ball, whether it's a loose ball, whatever, tackling somebody, that back step like cost you a lot of time.
Yeah.
It might be a more powerful step because you back step, but you might not have time to use all that power. The play might be gone.
Yeah.
So I understand like any science that might be involved in a back step or a plyo bounce step, but it's just the trade-off is what if the play happens before you can benefit from that. So
Yeah.
I'm a huge believer in straight ahead attack.
Yeah. So like my immediate thoughts with like that kind of back plyo step that you mentioned was like kind of going back to like whenever I played football, like whenever we were playing linebacker and you take like a read step
Yeah.
and then react.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would be a little bit more beneficial because you're still moving forward
Yep,
before you react.
absolutely.
But,
Yeah, that's
pretty
awesome.
interesting. Why don't we go into like a little bit more like traditional strength?
Sure.
Next. So say you take a kid that's like maybe 8th, 9th, 10th grade and they're trying out for like varsity or something. What are like a few core exercises in terms of just pure like strength and power that you think are best?
Yeah, I mean you can't ever get away from like primal movements. You see so much stuff today, like let's stand on a ball, scratch our head, swing something over our head, and lift a 5-pound dumbbell, and this looks very cool, and it's also very, very stupid for an athlete that can't do a basic squat yet.
Yeah.
So back to your question, primal movements, squats, deadlifts, pushes, whether it's overhead, whether it's horizontal, pulls, whether it's overhead or horizontal, those kind of form a nice basis. And I think what's neglected is there's not enough carrying going on. You need to carry things, farmer's walks, sandbags, odd objects, things that aren't cooperating with you, things you can't get a grip on. Those kind of help you tie things together in your body so you don't end up with just strong units. I think those things are super important, as well as an emphasis on core work for sure as kind of like a foundation for a good training program.
Yeah. So just real quick, like back to deadlifts. I mean, personally, I'm a big believer in doing deadlifts, whether it's conventional or sumo, just for like overall human development and strength.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say to somebody? I think I already have a pretty good answer, but what would you say to somebody that doesn't want to do deadlifts because they think there's too much risk versus reward?
Yeah, I mean, every exercise has inherent risk, but as humans, we're meant to squat down and pick things up. I would say that as long as the technique is perfect, and that means when weights get heavy, and I understand that the need to sometimes round out and hump up a lift. That's more in the we would save that more for the powerlifting world. As long as you maintain a nice neutral spine and properly do deadlifts, it's an extremely safe exercise. So I think it gets a bad rap, and the bad rap comes from people that experienced it because they lifted with horrible form, or it's just a myth. But I think the deadlift's a great exercise for athletes. I think it's one of the top 3, actually.
Awesome. Do you think like overall, just total body strength, like kind of also going back to deadlifts, do you think that has any effect on speed training? I know we talked about a little bit of pull-ups, stuff like that, but do you think that has any effect on like straight ahead speed or overall speed?
Yeah, I do absolutely, John. As far as like a base strength, like reactive resources to tap from is a nice fancy word. Like plyometrics, they're very effective in like development of speed, but you need resources for that to happen, and that's like a great foundation of strength. So I mean, you can do all the depth jumps and all the skips and the hops you want to do, but if you don't have something to tap from, a nice base of strength, that stuff's pretty much useless. So yeah, I think there's a huge part of it. It doesn't have to be an overwhelming amount, but you can't have a deficit of it.
Yeah. For like core lifts, like you mentioned before, like squat, bench, deadlift, how do you think like accessory lifts play into overall strength with each of those?
Definitely. I mean, it's like if you haven't played a sport in a long time, for instance, like, and you go out and you play it, and you're suddenly like sore. I mean, there's a lot of to be said about accessory moves. I think they kind of cause different kind of recruitment things to happen as far as like tying things together. So I think there's certainly a move, but those are obviously that's the icing on the cake. Obviously your core moves are always first.
Yeah.
The basics first, and then I think the accessory and the auxiliary exercises are awesome, particularly if you can't activate a certain muscle group right, and you can't just if your glutes aren't turning on when you're squatting, squat right, use your glutes. Well, it doesn't always work with some athletes, so
Right.
you gotta find a way to wake them up. So yeah, there's a place for them for sure.
You think like training your core along with those heavy compound movements is beneficial? Because I know, like for example, heavy squats, heavy deadlifts, even bench press. I find whenever I started getting into powerlifting, I felt like bracing my core to like as pretty much as hard as I can was like crucial, especially so I didn't miss a lift or even hurt myself. So that alone, I think, takes a lot of core strength and stability. So do you think adding even more, like just say like something as simple as like crunches or like Russian twists on top of like a heavy compound movement day is necessary?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary, and with special consideration given to things like when you do carries, like
Yeah.
if you have a heavy enough sandbag in front of you, your abdominal wall and your deep transverse abdominis better be on, or you're just going to crumple.
Yeah.
So yeah, core training is critical. I mean, it take power from your legs through your core to your hands. I mean, it's the conduit. So
Yeah.
I couldn't agree more with that for sure.
That's awesome. I think that's all I got for you today.
John, thank you for picking my brain. You got some areas awake again in me, and I really appreciate that. I appreciate you being here. Thanks so much.
Well, I appreciate being on here.
All right, folks, that was John Blackburn, and we're about ready to call off here. Hope you all listened to this. Hope you all enjoyed it, and we will talk soon.